Hello, welcome to Veterans Voices, a show dedicated to our veterans, active duty military, and first responders. My name is Ryan Luurtsema, Assistant Director of Military and Veteran Services here at Ocean County College. Joining us today is Sally Stenton, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force retired, of counsel at the law offices of Robert Eberup, LLC. Sally Stenton, welcome.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, if you can, Sally, tell us a little about yourself and your military career and what made you want to join the military.
I was in the Air Force for 21 and a half years. I'm a retired Air Force JAG. Prior to going into the Air Force, I did 4 years in the Army National Guard. I started as an MP, and I always like to say when I was in the Army, I got to see how the Air Force lived and ate. So when I was in law school, I actually only interviewed with the Air Force. And while I'm very proud of my time as a soldier, I'm very happy to be a retired airman.
Thank you for your long term of service and your diverse service. Thank you very much.
Well, it was my honor and my privilege to serve our nation.
So let me ask you, when you transitioning out of the military, was your first thought of continuing your law practices, and where do you do that now?
When I first got out, my last year or so in the military in the Air Force was difficult. I had spent a year in Afghanistan, and it was a very difficult time. I lost 9 of my friends and fellow advisors in the largest insider attack in all of OIF and OEF combined. So when I first got out, honestly, I just was recovering from that experience. So I really just didn't do a whole lot for a year. I was really healing, but I knew I wanted to stay in the practice of law. So when things got a little better, I wanted to help veterans. I really felt that one of the reasons I had survived that terrible attack was to continue in some sort of public service and continue to help in any way I can with veterans. And I came across this area of law, which is veterans benefit compensation.
Okay.
And that's how I ended up getting into this field.
Now, do you see it as a niche area for lawyers to get into, is veteran affairs and benefits?
Yes, I think it's probably what you'd call a niche area. It is private practice, but it's not well known at this point in time. I think it's becoming more well known in that a lot of law firms don't practice it. It hasn't been many years that lawyers could actually represent veterans and have any sort of compensation for that representation. A lot of veterans are familiar with a representative called VSOs, Veteran Service Officers. They could be the DAV, the VFW, the Vietnam Veterans of America. It's only been maybe in the past decade that lawyers were able to get compensation for their services in representing veterans in their claims and appeals when they took compensation claims to the Veterans Benefit Administration.
Now, with you representing veterans, do you see it as an area where veterans are not getting that proper representation from VSOs or persons from the VFW or American Legion people, and they go to private practice for yourself, like you represent veterans, and I would say a more law specialized way. Do you see veterans utilizing your services because they're having that misrepresentation?
I don't want to say it's misrepresentation, but this is it can be a very complicated area of the law. The Veterans Administration, unfortunately, does not make it easy for veterans to get their benefits. And I'd like to make it clear, there's a very big difference between the Veterans Health Administration, which is the hospitals, the doctors, the prescriptions, and the Veterans Benefit Administration. That's your compensation, that's your GI Bill, that's your VA home loans. What I represent veterans on is their VA compensation and pension.
Okay.
So VSOs, a lot of times what they do is they help veterans with their initial claims. And if there's an issue with the initial claim, then a lot of times that's beyond a VSO's capacity, and it involves complicated issues of the law. And that's when a veteran will come to me. Although they can also come to an attorney like myself for their initial claim. And at the initial claim, it's actually against the law for an attorney to charge any money, and we don't. I don't.
Okay, thank you. What areas that you have experience with the VA can you see developing a better process and procedures for benefits and compensation for veterans?
The Veterans Benefit Administration is a monolith, and it takes literally at times years to get an appeal through. And they have tried to modernize the appeal process, but it still takes way too long. I think there are certain claims that should be what I consider automatic, things like tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. I think any service member that puts in a claim for tinnitus, ringing in the ears, probably, except in very rare instances, should automatically be granted it. That's something that I would like to work on with a representative.
Especially when you can correlate their military experience, tinnitus, with marksmanship training, and then other combat fields that have those high octane type situations involvement. So I agree with that.
But even further than that, Ryan, I'm a retired JAG, but every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coastie, when you go through basic training or officer candidate school, you have to go through weapons training. It doesn't matter what your MOS or your AFSC is. You all have to go through weapons training. You all have to be weapons qualified. So whether you're, fly a desk, as we say in the Air Force, or you're an infantryman or a Navy SEAL, you all had to fire weapons, been around loud noises. So you are likely, if you have tinnitus and you've been in the active duty military, you've been through basic training, your tinnitus is likely from that experience.
True. For veteran benefits, from the outside perspective and looking in, do you see yourself as I'd say an advocate to the community, and more or less, as the VA probably looks at you as like you're targeting the VA for their, how can I say, pockets of error. But do you see yourself as an advocate for veterans in the community?
Yes, I'm an advocate in two ways. I'm an advocate because that's what a lawyer is, and we advocate for our clients, but I'm also an advocate in general for veterans. I'm a disabled veteran myself. I understand the process very well, having been through it, and I often say that I represent veterans in their claims and appeals against the Veterans Benefit Administration. Although the Veterans Benefit Administration is a non-adversarial process, according to them, I don't often find it that way. I find it to be very frustrating and very difficult to work through. There's all sorts of red tape, and I've been working in this field for 6 or 7 years now, and I deal with it every day, and I know how exhausting and hard it is. So for an individual veteran, especially one who has a lot of physical and or mental health issues, I don't know how they do it or get through the system, and a lot of them don't, and they give up.
When previously, when I was a student, the first thing I would do is run into other student veterans, and they had no ideation of benefits and compensation. They just got their DD-214 or their discharge papers, and they became a veteran or a civilian of society. A lot of times I think that is the pockets where we can attribute most in our community members is if there's a veteran that has no understanding of their benefits or didn't have the thought process of looking into their benefits, and you're creating a guided path for them to not just be successful, but you're also making sure that they're taken care of and what they deserve from their time of service. I really applaud you for that. That's very, very admirable of yourself.
Well, thank you. As I said, I really, it is my passion, and after my experience in Afghanistan, I really was searching for a reason that my 10 fellow advisors and friends were killed in action. And it happened in the room across the hall from where I worked every day. And I wasn't there. And I felt that, like so many of us that were on base but not there, there must have been a reason. And I feel like this is the reason that I was saved that day, so that I could stay and help my fellow veterans. And there are so many veterans out there that I have dealt with. I have a Korean War veteran as a client. I have Vietnam veterans, Vietnam era veterans. This is one of the things I've learned. A veteran is a veteran, and you don't have to be a combat veteran to be entitled to these benefits. All you have to have done is served on active duty. And there's so many veterans out there that don't understand that. They think because they didn't serve in a conflict or in a conflict zone or in a war that they're not entitled to VA compensation for their injuries. And that's not the case. From the day you start on active duty to the day you leave active duty, you are entitled to veterans benefits if there is an issue.
Now, with your reach per se, you don't just practice or cover or represent, rather, veterans locally. You actually have a more broad representation, right?
Yes, because veterans law is federal law. So I can represent a veteran anywhere in the world. So I have clients from here in South Jersey to Florida, Virginia, Arizona, California.
That's amazing. That's really amazing, because it doesn't really limit your advocacy or your representation either. And granted, though, I mean, New Jersey has the highest population per capita in the country for veterans. And it just so happens that Ocean County itself has the most dense populated senior veteran as well. Having that reach almost really creates an opportunity for veterans to reach out to you and really educate themselves a little bit on what either they're missing or what they can really deserve to be benefited by and compensated wise. I'd like to ask you a couple student questions we had submitted. Do you host fellowship or internships at your firm?
We haven't thus far, but we would certainly be open to it.
Oh, that'll be excellent.
Yes.
I'll be more in touch with you about that then.
Great.
Follow-up question is, roughly how many veterans have you assisted in retrieving benefits and compensation from the VA?
I have represented or am representing at this point over 100 veterans.
Oh, that's amazing. That truly is amazing. You've helped that many. Wow. Do you partner with any nonprofit organizations to assist their veterans or their family members?
Yes, there is an organization at Lindenwold, New Jersey. It's called Spectra Care Foundation.
Okay.
And we are in the process of opening, it's the Carlton A. Rue, that's R-O-U-H, Veterans Center. Carlton Rue was a Medal of Honor recipient from World War II, and he was born in Lindenwold, New Jersey.
So at this facility, what are the capabilities? Because some people may know, like a VSO's office is a Veterans Center. Well, what's so different about this one?
It's going to have a kitchen. It's going to have a big like recreation room with a pool table and I think it's a 65 or 75-inch flat screen TV. I'm going to have an office there because I'm going to volunteer my time to help veterans with their claims. We're going to have off-site equine therapy. We have an art room. We have computers available. We have photography available.
That's going to be amazing.
Yes.
It really will be
Yes.
a multi-applicative center, probably one of the most state-of-the-art ones in the state as far as varied options for not just rehabilitation, but also guidance and mentorship centers as well. That's amazing. I'll look into that for myself. Another student chimed in for a question. I think this is very unique, especially during times of where we are now with COVID, is the veteran transition experience. What do you see has changed from prior to the pandemic transitional experience, whether it's the VA representation or just personal if you've seen it? And then today, during the pandemic, have you experienced veterans and what's your perspective on them transitioning out of the military before and now during the pandemic?
Well, I transitioned out of the military in 2012 is when I retired. So I don't have as good a perspective on people transitioning out today during the pandemic. Although I do know a lot of veterans are suffering greatly during the pandemic. They can't get the services they need, a lot through even the VA Health Administration. But I do know during the pandemic, it has made my job much more difficult working with the Veterans Benefit Administration. And certainly for VSOs and individual veterans that are doing their own claims, their own appeals, it's much more difficult during the pandemic. It was always hard enough getting a hold of the Veterans Benefit Administration, but so many of the offices were closed during the pandemic. Some have not opened. I know the Philadelphia Regional Office is still not open. You can't get a hold of anybody to work with them, talk to them about your clients' claims, their appeals. The National Record Center was closed for months, so trying to get your clients' records to put in the appeal, to put in the evidence, everything was slow to begin with. It's been made even worse. Veterans have to go through, when they put in a claim or they're appealing or putting in a second claim for an additional issue, they have to go through what's called a compensation and pension examination, a C&P examination. Well, for several months during the pandemic, no one could get an examination. And these are done by contractors. They are not done by the Veterans Health Administration. The Veterans Health Administration and the Veterans Benefit Administration do not coexist. So all these C&P examinations were delayed, which made these claims and appeals go even longer. It's been very frustrating for these veterans whose benefits and compensation has been much delayed. And when they opened up the C&P examinations again, honestly, there were several offices, because I work with many of them throughout the country, weren't letting their veterans know. I many times had to call and I would get well, we're not doing C&P examinations. And I would have to tell them, yes, you are. I know that you're open. And I know that you can do telephone exams for certain issues. You know, for PTSD, for example, a lot of times they could do the C&P exam on the telephone because it's not a physical issue that they need to actually see the person.
So it's almost like it's really made the transparency even more difficult for not just yourself as a representative, but now as a veteran for yourself too in the system. That's quite unfortunate. I'd like to furthermore elaborate, if you will, if you can see a change or assistance in programming for Ocean County? And what would that be? How would you like to see something change in Ocean County to represent us veterans?
Well, and it wouldn't just be Ocean County, but I would like to see congressional representatives. I know that congressional representatives all the time go to the Veterans Benefit Administration on behalf of their constituents and ask questions. Where is this constituent's claim? Where is it in the process? Why hasn't it been adjudicated yet? And they continually get back a form letter. And I would like to see the representative, not just for Ocean County, but throughout the country, get better information and better answers from the Veterans Benefit Administration. And I'm hoping during this administration, as opposed to the last administration, that will happen.
So Sally, if I didn't hit a question and you had an opportunity to speak further about, what would that be?
The one most important thing, I think, for veterans to know to start their claim is a thing called their intent to file. An intent to file a claim, what you do is you call the Veterans Benefit Administration. It's a toll-free number, 800-827-1000. And you're going to go through a bunch of prompts, and eventually it's going to ask you for your social security number, your date of birth, and your branch of service. And when you talk to a live person, you tell them you want to do your intent to file a claim. And what that does is it locks in a date. And you have a year from the date of your intent to file your claim. And the reason it's so important is if you do your intent to file today, March 12th, 2021, and you file your claim March 11th, 2022, and you end up with a disability rating of 50%, they will pay you from March 12th, 2021. Whereas if you don't do an intent to file and you file your claim on March 11th, 2022, and you get a 50% disability rating, and say 50% rating is $1,000 a month. I'm just making up that number. Instead of getting $1,000 a month, $12,000 from 21 to 22, you will end up getting no past due compensation. You will just start getting paid from March 2022.
That is imperative. Thank you so much for your time, Sally, and thank you for being part of this show. Find more information at ocean.edu/military or go to our page at go.ocean.edu/military. I'm your host, Ryan Luurtsema, and thank you for watching another episode of Veterans Voices.